hear us better. But why don't we move towards tractor, which we're going to be talking about first.
You want to talk about the property at all?
Yeah, I just want to get out of the sun a little.
Yeah.
Out of staring at the sun anyway. Alright. Is this good? None of y'all are looking into the sun, right? So Annie and I purchased this property about 2 years ago now. We started first on a half-acre property on the east bank in the Bywater, which many of you have seen. And we were there for about a year, kind of with our eye on this property. We don't own the land across the river. We were kind of hoping to use that as a way to start and establish a presence and see what the demand was in town. And as we realized that the demand is definitely there for fresh vegetables and other kind of like farm products, we kept pursuing a more permanent purchase on the West Bank. We really liked this area. This piece of land actually had been on my radar for about 2 years, even before we moved back to New Orleans, because for those who don't know, we lived here about 10 years ago for a year and completely fell in love with the city and wanted to stay, but our jobs ran out and we kind of were seeking more training in a way that I think a lot of young people find, like a situation that is common for a lot of young people, I think, who come here looking to stay but are seeking kind of that next step. So we went away and I trained as a farmer in Massachusetts. We were there for 7 years before finally coming back and really fulfilling this kind of like long-standing dream vision to start a farm here. So I would, in the winters of Massachusetts, I would always like look at land that was for sale, kind of like browsing, you know. I would be very upset with the winter there. And this property was on my radar from like 2015 on. It was on the market for about 3 years. The woman who owned it did not want to subdivide. So the entire property is 88 acres. It goes, you actually can't see the end of it because of the tree line. So that far tree line is about halfway across the property. Probably about 2/3 of the way across the property. There's another pasture behind it. It gets progressively wetter as it goes back. There's a road at the very back of the property called Willow Road, and the land gradually slopes about 7 feet over the course of this distance. And the property for the last 50 years has been managed with cattle, just kind of free-ranging cattle here. You might see them because they're still here on about 80 of the acres. When we first bought the property, we had been meeting a lot with the man who manages the cattle and has been for the last about 50 years. His family lives in this area. His name is Randy Fortmeyer. And he expressed interest in staying on the property as much as possible. And he's a really great guy to know. He has a lot of useful equipment. He pours washout for us, these kind of like pads here that allow us to drive even when it's wet. He's like, you know, dealt with just like fallen trees, and my car battery died. He came over and jumped it. So he's just a useful guy to know. He's also great for managing the rest of the 80 acres. So if we were to buy this property and be in charge of managing all 88 acres, I don't think we would have done it. I think it's important to kind of have a management plan or a semblance of one in place when purchasing a property, because we are technically in Orleans Parish and could get a lot of negative attention from the city if we were just to let this kind of grow over. And mowing 88 acres, like that would have to be our full-time job. By the time we finish, we have to start again. So we were very excited and grateful to have Randy stay on the property. Hi.
How are you?
Welcome. Do you want to just share your name and if you're affiliated with a farm or a business or an organization?
Yes, my name is Marcos Guerrero.
All right. Nice to meet you.
I'm Annie.
This is my dad.
Great.
I'm here to learn.
Awesome. That's Annie. I'm Cheryl. And I was just saying this, we were just starting to talk about the property a little. We purchased the property 2 years ago. It's 88 acres in size, and we're just talking about how it kind of came with a built-in property manager who had been managing the property with cattle, and we are continuing to work with him to manage the majority of the property still. So like I was saying, we were really excited to have Randy stick around. The cattle are still on about 80 of the acres. He fenced us off about 8 or 9 acres in the front here, so this first kind of like scrubby brush line is where our fence for this first pasture section starts. And this is the highest part of the land. This is what we determined to be the best area to grow vegetables. It's also the most accessible from the road, the existing parking area, the existing high and dry areas. It does get very wet here, even though this is the high spot. It can still be very tricky to drive equipment. Our mower has gotten stuck plenty of times. So these are all things that we thought a little bit about, but you kind of like, as we went through a full year on this property, things became much clearer. And so there are certain purchases that I wouldn't make again. Can you grab some more of the drum on the binder? So our initial thought, so like I mentioned, I learned to farm pretty seriously. Like I worked a lot with community gardeners down here when we lived here before, but I really learned how to manage a farm in Massachusetts, and the really traditional way there to turn over fresh pasture is with a moldboard plow. And I think that's a pretty typical way around the country to turn over fresh pasture, and that's the third thing on the list here, so that was kind of our plan coming in, was like, okay, we need a tractor, and we knew the soil was going to be incredibly dense, heavy clay. Just knowing the soil in the area, we'd also taken some soil tests. It was hard to even sink a shovel in. So we knew we needed a little more horsepower than we would have maybe gone with had we had sandier soil, or knew that we wanted to just maybe stay under 5 acres. And so we ended up, after we have a farm consultant who knows a lot about equipment and soil, and so we talked with her a lot. We talked with the dealer at Evergreen, which is in Covington. They're I don't know if they just do Kubota, but they do a lot of Kubota. Is it just Kubota? A Kubota dealer.
We found out about that through Grow Louisiana. They went there. The guy, Ben, he went to LSU and knew about Marquis and what y'all are doing, and so he was like, "Are there any people in that program who would be interested in purchasing from us? We'll give them a discount." So that's how we got connected to him.
Yeah, we did get a discount. I don't remember what it was. It was like,
it wasn't a huge discount.
It was like $800 off of
Yeah.
a $40,000 tractor. So it's not nothing. It's not nothing. So a lot of we read a lot about kind of what size tractor do I need for this size farm. We talked with Ellen, our consultant, and we settled on a little bit more horsepower than we needed according to what we were discovering, knowing that we were managing a larger property. While we're not managing all 88 acres, we do have projects going on in different parts of the farm. There's a 5-acre stand of trees, kind of a forested area that we have some ideas for. There's a little stand of trees back here that requires a lot of rough mowing and kind of hauling of stuff.
There's also Kristen's in there.
There's also, yeah, a 3-acre area fenced off for some flower growers that we're leasing to. We also knew that trying to like break ground in this dense soil was going to need a little more horsepower. That was more than what was recommended for just like a size factor. And I'm very happy with our tractor. We probably could have gotten away with like 45 to 50, or if we were just going to be, like I said, in that 5 acres or under range, like 30 to 40 horsepower range. But something that Ellen says, and I've heard also other farmers say, is like nobody's ever regretted more horsepower or more cooler space or more roof space. So those are like things that we keep considering as we make these infrastructure and equipment investments, knowing that we're growing steadily and hoping to grow beyond just this 9-acre property that we're working on to begin with the vegetables. And I would like to transition to more kind of like tractor-based growing in some of the areas of the farm. And so those were all factors that we considered when deciding which tractor and what horsepower. So the tractor itself ended up being about $40,000. Kubota's financing is unbeatable. It's 0% down, 0% financing, or 0% interest for 60 months, so for 5 years. Beds were made on Wednesday. Christian was out here getting familiar with the rotary plow, which is what this attachment is currently. You can see it better from this side. So after taking the tarp off of this section, which we did last week, we came through and did a crosshatch subsoiling with the BCS, which that was the workout that we were talking about. And then we came through with the rotary plow, which flails soil to one side, which is the right side, to make this shoulder here. And that I have found is a lot easier to do if we just subsoiled. Otherwise you're trying to chip into this, which is still pretty dense. Like, even though this has now had 2 seasons worth of cover crop in it, and it's been tarped, and it has plenty of organic matter that's been decomposing on the surface, yet trying to get the rotary plow kind of shanks, I don't know what these are called, their teeth, trying to get that to bite in, like we'd blades, there you go. We probably would get a shoulder just about this high, which, knowing how much moisture we get, how much our soil holds water, that's not going to be high enough to keep our plants happy. But subsoiling allows us to get this nice elevated, like this is probably like 10 inches, you know, and this is probably higher than it'll be. This is somewhere in between. But this is I'm pretty happy with this. Like, these were made a couple weeks ago. And again, these will continue to improve, and it doesn't look like it's the kind of like siltiest, loamiest soil, but planting into here is actually not that bad. You know, we have a trowel or we have a knife, and the plants look happy.
It hasn't rained.
It hasn't rained. The other thing is, we don't really have irrigation. We've done a little hand watering here, but we don't have regular irrigation on most of what grows out here. But, you know, you can see there's plenty of moisture in here. Like, this is 2 weeks without rain.
Is that because you guys are so close to the river?
That's probably part of it. The water table is pretty high here. Sometimes it's so high that we can't dig. Like we've been trying to put up some lean-to structures, and all spring we're too close to the river to actually dig more than a foot down. So sometimes, yeah, the water is like right here. And I think also just clay holds moisture really well. I would actually really rather grow on clay, really dense clay. Like, I'd rather this soil than what we have on the East Bank, which is just like pure river sand, and we have to irrigate after we get like 6 inches of rain. We irrigate like the next day. So in terms of moisture retention and just like general nutrient content, like this is really good soil. It's just like, can you get into it? And can you make the plant roots able to access the fertility that is in here? But I do think that we've settled for now on a system that seems to be working. And you can see in the packet here, so I talked a little bit about the mower that we had for the BCS, which I do think is a really great mower. Like I love that mower. I learned farming with that mower. But it just became really hard to use. I think if you are on sandy soil and don't have to raise your beds a lot, a flail mower is a really great tool because it flails whatever it's mowing like into tiny pieces, so it makes it really really easy to decompose. It makes it much faster, especially if you are going to like incorporate it. A lot of people will flail mow and then they'll do a tillage pass with a tiller. And that breaking down of the soil happens really fast and adds that organic matter into whatever you're going to plant next. And that's just a faster process when you have smaller pieces. We're a little more passive on our incorporation with the tarping and with the kind of like mowing of the bigger pieces, so I'm not as concerned about like incorporating them right away. Like I don't mind, we're not going to direct seed with our bush seeder in here. We're going to hand transplant a lot of stuff or plant peas, which we do by hand. So I don't mind a little residue, like kind of like it. It's a little bit of mulch. Looks nice. Okay.
So is there another step before you add compost to this?
So the next step before planting we'll come through and broad fork, and then we'll add compost and plant. And we'll rake like just to kind of shape it and see if we can break up these clumps a little bit.
Are you able to get a broad fork into this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you guys have?
Which broad fork? We have 3 different broad forks. The one that comes with
Two.
the BCS.
Technically.
We have 2 good ones. So there's one that comes when you order a BCS. It's pure crap, especially if you have soil like this.
No, the John gave us that as the BCS.
It comes, I don't know why it comes with BCS. I think they do sell it through Johnny's. But it just has really like narrow, kind of flimsy tines, not really strong welding. We have a Valley Oak broad fork, which is the blue one, which I really, really like. The tines are pretty long, so you can grip a lot more soil with it, but it can be a little more labor intensive. And then we got one, I don't know what the brand is, but we got it from Earth Tools, which is where I recommend, if y'all are looking for any equipment, especially like walk behind tractor equipment, I definitely recommend Earth Tools in Kentucky. Their customer service is amazing. I did not buy this from them because I didn't know about them at the time, yet I still call the guy who founded it multiple times a year, and he walks me through issues that I'm having with the BCS. He has a series of videos on his website that's super helpful for troubleshooting. Like all of our troubleshooting happens through his website and on the phone with him. And they also sell hand tools and broad forks, so I try to get all of our hand tools from them now. And I got a broad fork from him, which is nice.
I
The
think I've
tines are
seen
a little.
Earth Creature. Is it? Well, it's Earth Creature. I think it's called something Creature.
The broad fork itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be.
Different size.
Yeah. We just got like I asked him for, I was like, we have really heavy clay but no rocks. Like, what do you recommend? He's like, just get the basic one. You don't need like the extra heavy duty. Because it actually works pretty well on the clay. Like, once it's been worked, like Michael, if we were trying to broad fork like the pathway, that would be a little more challenging.
Stop
But
and cold, yeah.
subsoiling first, and then coming through with the rotary plow, that makes makes actually a pretty nice aerated bed space.
And there's also a big difference between the first time you broad fork and like the second time.
Now, once you
Yeah.
drag the subsoiler through and it busts up the soil, the rotary plow, I guess it spins on like that tilted upright axis,
Yep.
and it just throws soil
So it
off to one
sinks-
side.
It'll sink in. We can actually do
So if you want to do a demo.
demo. Does anyone have any more questions about the BCS?
Is that good to buy new or used?
The BCS, if you can get it used, definitely buy it used. I think there just aren't that many people around here who have them and now are looking to get rid of them. I think we're still kind of like a new generation of BCS owners in this area.
Is Ben selling?
I don't think, I know Margie was trying to get Ben at Evergreen where we got our tractor to start dealing with the BCS. I don't think he is. He's definitely not doing it yet, but he might consider it in the future. Right now, the closest BCS dealers are Earth Tools in Kentucky and Homestead Maintenance in Waco, Texas. And they're both about 8 hours away. So you can't just like show up and kind of fiddle with stuff, which would be really nice if we had just like a place where you could go and like test run stuff and talk about implements and things like that. We have a few implements, but there are like dozens of things you can get to attach to this machine. This machine is useful for all kinds of property maintenance. If you're on a smaller scale, like you can get a wood chipper, or you can get a mulch spreader. Like if you do a lot of just like hauling of material but don't want a tractor, this is a good thing to think about. There actually is like even a compost spreader, but again, like Michael, you were asking about straddling the bed. I think you would want to straddle the bed to do it. But it can drop like 3 wheelbarrows full in one pass instead of, just doing the wheelbarrow by hand. But yeah, I think buying this new, the tractor, this is the 853, which is the most powerful tractor. I think they now have one in the 900s, but when we bought this 3 years ago, this was the strongest one that they had, which I knew again we would want because of our soil. And the tractor itself was like $4,300 without the implements. And the implements run from like less than $1,000. The subsoiler was $200. The plow I think is about $1,200. I think I put it on the worksheet, but like this, this is a really great tractor alternative if you're on a small scale and can like just need to like be in the field. Like most of the work you're doing is like actually in the field, and you're like actually growing on less than like 2 to 3 acres. And the BCS is a really, really great tool. We are probably a little bit unique in that we don't have a tiller. That I think is probably the most common implement that people purchase with the BCS. If we had a tiller, we could just come through and till the tops of these beds.
Here's the power harrow.
We have a power harrow, which I thought would be a good replacement for the tiller, because again, like the tiller works in a kind of like vertical inversion rotation where the tines turn this way, and it again inverts the soil, flips the soil, it pulverizes what it can grip on top, and it creates a really nice seed bed, but it also disrupts the structure and brings a lot of weed seeds to the surface. So we didn't even invest in a tiller from the beginning because I want to move away from tillage, but I thought that like a harrow would be a good harrow turn horizontally. So they're not really inverting the layers, they're just like kind of helping to break up some of the bonds. But the harrow that we have, it's like, it weighs 200 pounds. And again, it's just like, it's so hard to physically use it. It's hard to like get it up on the raised bed. Sometimes it wants to like pull off to the side. I don't use it because I don't want to. And it could be a really valuable tool. Like I might experiment with it again, but if you had to get an implement, I wouldn't recommend the harrow, personally. They do make lighter versions, but even that's lighter by only like 50 pounds. So I think like if you're thinking about purchasing a property or thinking about equipment or just thinking about like how do I get from this lawn to growing into, you definitely want to think about like your own capacity for physical machine wrangling, and also what is your soil type. Like, are you going to need to raise your beds because it's really wet or it holds water? And then are you going to want to be kind of like riding up on those shoulders with the machine, or can you just, is it dry enough that you can get over them with a tractor? So these are questions that like we're still even working out. We're still trying to figure out, is this the best system? I don't really know. But it works well enough looking at this. I can live with this. Plus a broad fork.
I have a question. How did you cut down your Sudan grass? I did not remember.
That was with the rotary mower on the tractor.
So normally, because that throws it to one side, it's not even on the top. You're not worried about it as much.
I'm not that worried about it. Because we come back through with the zero turn, which also throws it to one side, to get it down really low before tarping. Like that little corner right there, that's been mowed twice now, and it's starting to grow back. And when we move that other tarp, I'll come through and mow that really low with the zero turn. And you can see it's like probably uneven, but it's not enough to make a noticeable difference.
Where do you get your cover crop seeds?
We get our seed from Hancock Seed in Florida. They have some bulk shipping to here, bulk shipping deals. And we also get it from Seven Springs Farm in Virginia. It's an organic grower supply store. So it kind of depends if we need other stuff or just seed.
Are you guys certified organic?
We're not certified organic. We're certified naturally grown. So it's similar practices, but it's a pure certification. So another farmer will certify us, and we have to certify other farmers. It's much cheaper. It's like
Yeah.
$200 a year as opposed to like, $1,000.
So
But
about the bin.
yeah, and you don't have to deal with government, USDA agents, or like third-party private certifying businesses, which is also a thing. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about the organic program. I think they've passed some very sketchy laws related to hydroponics and animal care specifically in the past couple of years. They're allowing a lot of things that I don't think are in the spirit of what the organic movement started for. They're allowing a lot of corporations to use the organic label without actually following through on the practices. A lot of loopholes. So we feel better about CNG, certified naturally grown. I don't think it's necessary in our kind of like marketing climate to be certified anything. But CNG was like easy enough to do and affordable enough that when we were doing farmers markets, it made more sense. And I would just kind of stuck with it. Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about maintenance. So if you're gonna buy equipment, it's good to have a maintenance plan. Equipment is tracked by the hours that it's used, not like the mileage or anything. So you're not going very far, but you're taking a lot of time to use it. So, you know, there are all these standards that like at 50 hours of use you want to do this, at 100 hours you want to do this. The tractor and mower both have hour trackers on them, so we can see exactly how long we've used that tractor for. And does anyone here actually read user manuals when you get something? Yeah, Chelsea. So that wasn't something that I really did very much. I'll be honest, before, you know, when I got like an appliance or something, I was like, yeah, whatever.
Right.
But with a piece of equipment, like I am very sure to go through and I read the user manual, kind of like go through, make sure there aren't any things that I don't understand that they're talking about. Especially like as a woman or someone who's like maybe unexpected to be thinking about these things, I find it's really empowering and important if I'm gonna like talk about maintenance with my dealer. Like I wanna be knowledgeable about what I'm talking about as much as possible. And so I go through and I read the manual, and I also make a schedule of maintenance and like what page you can find it on in the manual. So like at 50 hours of use for the BCS, we want to come through and check the spark plug, we want to check the spark arresting screen, we want to like clean the air filter. These are all things that are really simple to do and really like DIY, like you definitely don't need to bring it in. We're changing the oil on these machines, like all stuff that we can do, and it's all right there in the manual. It all says like just do it here. And I think as someone who like didn't grow up around cars or like didn't grow up around equipment, it's easy to feel like this, like I don't understand what's going on with these machines. So it's very easy, and you don't.
It's like a free tractor.
And your first payment isn't for like 6 weeks after you buy it, so you can literally just get all this equipment without paying a single cent, and then you get a monthly bill. So it's like, also I was looking back at our bills trying to parse out how much each item costs, and it's all lumped together, so I can't actually tell you exactly how much the tractor was versus like the front end loader attachment, which doesn't come with a brand new tractor, or the forks. We also have pallet forks. Those were probably like $700 or $800. But after some kind of like internet research, I can roughly tell you how much the implements cost. So we knew we wanted a rough mower with our tractor. This is just a 6 foot wide, to match the width of our tractor, Land Pride rotary mower that we use for like the really first rough cut on a pasture. So like that far pasture, you can see there's some goldenrod. We'll probably in the next few weeks mow that with this mower first, and then come back through with the 0 turn finishing mower to get the grass down to really a couple inches, and then come through with our subsoiler, which is the 4th thing on the list here. And this is kind of the method that we've settled on for breaking new ground. I got a little sidetracked after talking about the plow, but the plow did not work. We tried the plow. We actually just sold it to someone in Massachusetts, and I sent it home with my dad, who my parents were visiting. We loaded it up into their SUV because I don't want to sell it to anyone here who has heavy clay soil, because I don't think it's the right implement. And there are also issues with plows.
You want to tell the story about that one?
Yes, okay, so this was a very discouraging thing. I was just kind of going forward with the way that I knew how to turn over new ground, which was with the plow. And we plowed like one strip in this field that we're now growing in here. And it was like right before Mother's Day of 2019. And I don't know if y'all remember, but we got like 8 inches of rain on Mother's Day of 2019. So like that Friday, we had just flipped over our first plow pass, and it didn't quite work. Like the soil didn't quite all flip over. It was just like really, it had a hard time getting into it, and it didn't feel like it was going very well. We only did 2 passes because I was like, I don't think this is right. And we came back on Monday after Mother's Day, and it was just like the little ditch that it made was just standing with water. And that water was probably there for like a week. And I sent a picture of it to Ellen, our consultant, and she wrote back this kind of lengthy email that was like, I just want to be honest, I don't know that this land is suited for growing vegetables. Like, I don't think, like, I want you to consider other options. And that was a real blow because, you know, we have a lot of ideas for this land, but growing vegetables was kind of like the central focus, you know, and that was going to be the first thing that we were going to start with. And so that was really discouraging to hear, and I'm glad that we didn't. I was like, you know, I'm going to try a few other things. I don't think you're quite right about this, but I also hear you. And she's coming from a more traditional turning over of the fields also, and so that was useful to see that didn't work. I mean, it wasn't something that I wish we had actually done because it was expensive and a pain to do that. We did end up plowing the rest of the field because we at that point didn't have an alternative and wanted to get our cover crop in for the summer. So we plowed it. It was very rough. It did not look good. And we rented a disc from a nearby tractor company that we ultimately ended up buying a disc from because we were just renting it enough that it made it worth it to buy it. And that's the disc is on the second page. And that kind of like helps to break up the clods, but again, I don't think it's the greatest implement, but it worked enough to get our cover crop in. So we just like threw cover crop out before we were leaving on summer vacation. I had very little hope for it, but when we came back in August, it was like 8 feet tall. It had grown beautifully. It gave me a little bit of hope that we could grow vegetables here. And so that was last summer. And so once our cover crop comes up, the next strategy that we used was to mow with the tractor, get that rough cut, and then we came through with the 0 turn again to get it lower, and then we tarped sections of it. So you can see that's what we're doing here. This field also had cover crop in it over this summer. This was us expanding into this next acre. And once it's tarped, that's kind of like elevating to that next jumping off point for actually making beds.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Oh no.
So
it's
did
okay.
you use this tractor to plow, or what
Yes.
did you use to plow?
We used this tractor to plow, and
And you rented this also.
and to disc. Yeah, that's a good question. And that's when I was really happy to have that horsepower with plowing. Even like as bad as it was, it would have been worse if the tractor was not as strong as it is.
And what size is it?
The tractor
Yeah.
is a 63.5 horsepower. It's an M6060. And I think,
There's 2 different series. There's the L and the M, and the M is
yeah, the M, this is like a low M, or it would be a high L. The L usually goes into the 50 horsepower. These are utility tractors. That's how Kubota classifies them. They're kind of like more versatile for mid-range size farms, like more than a homeowner just like kind of messing around on a few acres on a homestead, but less than, you know, your kind of more conventional like single-use tractors.
And why Kubota? I'm just curious. That y'all would
good question.
I learned to drive on a John Deere and then a Kubota, and I like the Kubota better. And also I'd heard from a lot of my female or other like smaller bodied farm peers in Massachusetts that John Deere tractors were a little less ergonomically friendly towards smaller people, and I just always liked Kubota, had good experiences with them.
Awesome.
So it's always just like a personal preference.
Right. I just had to figure it out.
Yeah.
Kept
It's
saying
like
Coca-Cola.
there are a couple of Kubota dealers in the area, so
What about parts? It's easy to get parts where it's a new tractor, I guess you don't.
parts, yeah, well it's easy. So we've had a few kind of issues with our tractor, just kind of like user error stuff.
New driver.
Yeah, mostly. So we'll just contact the dealer that we work with, Evergreen, and we don't have a trailer, which I'm very like I don't like driving large trailers, so I've never gotten one. It's something that I should really get good at because it's a lot of money to have them come and get it and bring it there and then bring it back. Like the actual work that they do on it is not that expensive. It's the transport because we're not that close. So I think if you are investing in equipment, it's really good to think about like where are those kind of hidden costs that you're maybe not anticipating when you see that ticket price. Like, yeah, if you need service or parts and you're in a rural area or even just kind of an awkward area, like this isn't rural, but it's not that close to where we need to be in order to get it serviced. We have a couple of like smaller, more yard kind of tractor-y places around here where I could get advice or like have the BCS service, like that's useful. But this tractor, we have to send it somewhere. I also find like the used tractor market is usually pretty good, but it's like they're often pretty expensive. You know, I feel like you get for the financing that you get with Kubota, it wasn't like that much more appealing to shave a few $1,000s off of a used tractor in the same kind of class as this one for us. There aren't as many farmers in this area using this size tractor, so we weren't able to kind of find after searching a lot. We found like a few things that could work, but weren't exactly what we were looking for, and then it just felt a lot simpler and more straightforward to go through
And
the
then
dealer.
you get the service
And the service and the insurance through Kubota. So after that plowing experience, we kind of tucked the plow away, and like I said, we just sold it, which I'm very glad about, and transitioned to a subsoiler, which is a lot cheaper. It's only $200. You can get it at Tractor Supply. You can throw it in your like Prius, you know, it's small, and I find it to be very effective actually on the heavy clay. Also because of that extra horsepower, it does not have a difficult time sinking it all the way and pulling it through our soil, just to kind of like aerate and create that single shank pathway that also elevates the soil enough that when we come through after with the disc, it's enough to rough seed a cover crop because there's enough like turning of the soil without actually like flipping it over, which is something that we're trying to avoid. I should have mentioned we're trying to be like pretty low till and moving towards no till because of the kind of constant erosion. I'm just gonna like bring it in. It's doing something funny, but I think like checking the manual and also YouTube have all been very valuable resources when troubleshooting or just trying to do basic maintenance on the machines, which saves us time in transporting it and also a lot of money, and so we do something that we could have easily done ourselves. So I think it's important to just familiarize yourself with the terminology, with the tools that you might need, and also just be prepared to learn a lot about your machine, because things break down with every one of these machines. We've been on the phone with people about something that was happening to it. I'm also not afraid to just I haven't had any personal experience with people kind of like laughing at me or like making me feel dumb when I'm talking about machinery, and I think that's been really great. I'm really grateful for that, but also that's a real concern for those of us who might not be as familiar with machinery or understand, like, you know, like I've broken that pull cord several times and had to replace it several times, and just trying to think about, like, why is there white smoke coming out of the machine? I think I've found it to be just very empowering just to call and ask and talk to people about it, and watch videos and kind of get in there and mess around with it. Like, you know, take the blades off the plow and sharpen them on a rainy day. Like, I don't know, it's like I'm not that interested in the machine, but I think it's a necessary part of farming, of running a business, is like just being familiar enough to know when it's time to bring it in and when it's time to just like have a half day where you take it apart. Good internet access so you can watch videos. Call Joel at our schools, have him walk you through it. It's not as hard to understand as it might seem. Has been what I've learned about it.
These are kind of designed to be able to work on yourself with everything, I would say.
Yeah, these are very much designed to be fixed on farm and to be tinkered with on farm with some very basic tools that you can get at AutoZone or like a Lowe's or something like that. The tractor is also, I mean, it's bigger, but it's also very accessible. Easy to access. You know, most people who buy a tractor aren't like experts at fixing it yet, so when it breaks, that's when you become an expert at fixing it. Alright, well, we can, the only other tools that I put on the chart are just like more of our hand landscaping and forestry tools. We're big fans of the Ego brand electric tools. So we have an electric push lawnmower, an electric weed whacker. What? Battery, electric battery powered, and an electric chainsaw or battery powered chainsaw. And those all come in handy when just like maintaining property and the tree line, kind of light burn pile type stuff. Cool. So if anyone wants to try the BCS, I'm not gonna have you plow. That's intense. I can put the transport wheel on because the plow is a good balancing act for the machine. If anyone wants to just get familiar with the controls or anything like that, I can bring it out into the side yard and people can kind of just like walk around, go in reverse, kind of get a feel for it. Otherwise, do y'all have any other questions?
Check out, it's got a diff.
Yeah, there's more implements over there.
And inside the shed, we've got the other DCS implements, the flail mower and the power harrow.
Yeah, the ones that,
You want to take a
if
look?
anyone wants to buy a Power Harrow.
How much are you gonna sell for?
We
don't-
selling
we don't
it for like
have one yet.
1,500. What?
We don't have one yet.
Do you want one, Carl?
We actually, it'd be nice to have one. Yeah, see, we have the flail mower, we have the tiller. We use
Yeah.
the tiller a lot.
Yes, please bring it.
We'll have to see what we can do.
See if we can pick it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would be happy to get rid of it because breaking down the tillage causes in soil, and also just because like it's often too wet to get in here with a tractor. It's only a few times a year that we can really like use our tractor on our full fields rather than kind of around the perimeter and doing mowing and stuff like that. So I don't want to be dependent on my tractor to like turn over beds and things like that, because that compaction is just, it's really horrifying. It's very fast, and it you can see there are areas around the farm where it was too wet to even drive the tractor on the field edge, and we just have these ruts that would be impossible to grow into if that were our field. So for our system, I think we've settled on this for now. I should have put on here that my kind of dream implement would be a no-till drill, where you can kind of just seed directly into a pasture without having to turn it over and having to expose that soil to get that soil to seed contact, because it can just kind of cut a strip into the residue and drop a seed and kind of make that seed to soil contact all in one pass. And if I had one of those, I would seed all of my cover crop that way, and I would seed like 20 acres of it, because it has really good germination because of the precision of it, and it also, yeah, Carl.
You know, Galen Iverstein has one.
Who?
Galen Iverstein. Up in
Galen
Kentwood.
Iverstein?
Yeah, Galen. He's a livestock farmer. He has one.
Where is he?
He's in Kentwood.
Kenwood.
Yeah, Galen. I think he still has it. He bought it in Mississippi.
Does he rent it out?
He has.
And
he's,
deliver it?
He's getting away from that. He has a butcher shop in Baton Rouge, so he's actually getting away
Okay.
from the farming side. So.
Ooh, does he want to sell it?
I don't know. I haven't really talked to him in a while.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, well, maybe I'll
Just-
get
yeah,
it.
just think about it.
Yeah.
There was, so the NRCS, everyone that, like Ellen, our consultant, everyone else I've talked to was like, contact the NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service. They should rent them out, because these are conservation implements that a lot of even conventional growers use to reduce their need for tillage. And around the country, the NRCS offices will rent these out. And so I called the NRCS, and they connected me to a guy named Hezzy Crane. I don't know if anyone knows who that is. He's up in Franklinton, and he also has one. But after just a lot of back and forth, we determined that it was too big to transport over the bridge. So that might also be an issue.
How big is it?
8 feet wide,
And how big is the tractor? I guess it's 6
6
feet
feet
wide.
wide. Yeah. So anyway, these are all things that that we've been learning as we've gone. The soil here is very different from Massachusetts. There is heavy clay in Massachusetts, but what they consider heavy clay is nothing like I've seen there is anything like this. Probably also because just there's constant moisture here, and so it's like the clay always kind of feels wet. You know, like sometimes that surface crusts over, but underneath it's still just like this dense brick of clay. Yeah, Rome.
So the subsoiler and the plow actually have two different functions.
Yes.
The plow turns it over, and the subsoiler does.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So the plow acts like a scoop. It kind of like digs in, and I kind of wish we still had the plow just so you could see it, but I'm also glad we've got it. So it's kind of curved. It's a curved blade, so it scoops, and as you go, the action of pulling it flips over a section of soil that's the width of the plow blade. And so you can get a single bottom plow, which is just one scoop,
Picture of what it
or you can get like a 2 or 3 bottom, or even like large farms can have, you know, multiple plows. And they're pulling it behind, and they're just flipping, inverting the first kind of like 8 to 12 inches of soil. The subsoiler is just a single shank.
This is the
that digs
subsoiler for
in.
the BCS, but you can see the tractor one over there, it's just slightly bigger.
Yeah. So this doesn't flip it over, but it does lift it a little, just the action of displacing that space that it's taking up will kind of, yeah, like push it out a little and make it a little bit bumpy. You can actually see, like, this field right here beyond where these plants are planted, this kind of like empty area where the BCS is, that left section was subsoil, the BCS. And so you can see it's like a little bit bumpy and raised. And so on a new on like a freshly mowed like cover crop or pasture, doing the subsoiler will loosen it up enough that then running a disc through it, afterwards it will almost look like it's been plowed.
This is what the plow did. Is that the plow?
So on a typical bed, are you making multiple passes back and forth with the subsoiler before going over it with the disc, or does it take just like one dig through, or how does it?
So we're not doing this on beds
Oh,
quite yet.
okay.
We're just doing this on like full fields that have been cover cropped.
I see.
Or if we want to first dig into a pasture, like, so I'm looking at like that far pasture and I'm like, I want to plant into there in the spring. I'm gonna mow it. I'm gonna mow it down as much as I can, and then I'm gonna subsoil it. And if it's dry enough and if I'm feeling, you know, energetic, then I might subsoil it in a crosshatch pattern.
Hmm.
If I'm not and I'm annoyed, or if it's raining or if it's hot, I'll just do one direction.
Okay.
But
Or
you
if it's,
do
like,
it
really
like back
wet.
and forth,
Yeah.
so that it's every 6 feet or so.
Yeah, it's roughly the distance of the tractor. And then I'm gonna switch to the disc, which is these are all just ground driven implements for the tractor. They're just the functionality comes from just pulling them through the soil. And so the disc is just a series of heavy metal discs that are in parallel with each other and kind of at different angles in their little section of the implement, which you can kind of see on the second page on the top. And that helps to just break up those clods that are brought up by the subsoiler. So you're essentially introducing air and trying to create a surface that is more soil than grass, so that anything we throw down there to seed for cover crop will make contact with soil in a way that will allow it to germinate. And the reason we use cover crop is because we're trying to grow a lot of biomass, because our soil is really heavy clay. We're on this kind of like long-term strategy to constantly be adding organic matter to it. So just like any material that's going to break down and make our soil less dense, less like brick-like. So we grow these cover crops, and we grow specific cover crops that just grow big and outcompete weeds, because we also don't want tons of weeds growing in our pasture and going to seed. So we grow these big cover crops. Like in the summer we grow tons of Sudan grass, which is what you see back there. That's actually been mowed, and that's regrowth on our cover crop from the summer. That looks like corn. It's just Sudan grass. It grows very fast. It grows in very rough conditions, which we learned after our incident with the plowing, and feeling very not confident that it was going to germinate. But it did, and it grew beautifully. And so now I love Sudan grass. I'll grow it every summer. And when we mow it down, it's basically just like straw. Like the residue breaks down and becomes this kind of like mulch on the beds, which is really nice, because as that breaks down, it creates a lot of like great
Yeah.
new soil.
You can see that pasture that's just been broken into has that straw.
Yeah, and it was even denser than that before we came in and it subsoiled it. So this is kind of our way of incorporating organic matter into the soil without having to till it aggressively and really like forcing it to become that like plantable, kind of workable, tilty soil. This is our slightly more passive but still disruptive way. Like we're still having to do tillage. Like subsoiling is still tillage. We're still disrupting the soil structure. Disking is definitely still tillage. But we're trying to do that as little as possible to get to a point where we can then have permanent growing beds, which is where we have kind of gotten to here. So this acre here we broke ground in after cover cropping last August. That was when the first actual vegetable plants went into the ground here. And throughout last year, we kept building beds, and we did that with the BCS. So once we have our full field prepped and cover cropped, then we bring in our tarps after mowing down that cover crop, and then we'll untarp it, and that's when we use the BCS. Yeah, go on.
So, does the sorghum grass go to seed, and is that a problem when you?
It does go to seed. I'm not as concerned about that. It hasn't been much of an issue.
Because once you cover it, I mean,
Yeah, once we tarp it, anything under that tarp is going to get dealt with. And I don't mind a little Sudan grass popping up. There are certain cover crops that I wouldn't want to go to seed, like rye. Rye is kind of notorious for like being hard to eradicate if you get it in your growing beds and it keeps coming back. Like you want to be more on top of that. But we haven't had issues with the Sudan grass. I'm a little more lax about letting stuff that I like go to seed than other growers. Some growers are very kind of like on top of it, which I totally respect. But like that's not where my energy is right now. So we're a little less
Yeah.
kind of strict about that. So the reason that I use the BCS to make beds instead of the tractor, like a lot of people would just keep using the tractor, you can get a bed shaper, is that it's too wet. Like I was saying, it's just, sometimes it's too wet even for the BCS, but we still use the BCS because we can. But like, you know, I was training our apprentices on using the BCS on subsoiling, and Kyle and Chelsea had the pleasure of subsoiling soon after we pulled the tarp off, where it's still pretty wet. It was, the moisture had still kind of been hanging on, and that's just like, it's a beast. Like you have to really, the BCS should just be able to pull that subsoiler through when you're kind of just guiding it. It should be this nice sunny day, you know, beautiful thing, but you have to really like fight with it on this soil when it's wet. And then a few days later, Christian did it, and it was a little nicer. I had Chelsea try it out just to compare, and right, it was like night and day.
Yep.
Like you could almost get to that point where it's kind of just guiding you. It's still a workout, but it was more pleasurable than having to like lift it every couple of feet when it gets kind of bogged down in that clay.
and is it adjustable, or once you
The
set
subsoiler.
it? Yes.
This is not adjustable on the depth. That's really just a manpower thing. Like you're lifting it if you want it to be shallower, or you're trying to push it down if you want to get it as deep as you can. You can adjust it kind of with the drawbar if you want it to be like offset from the wheels, but that's really the only adjustment. So I would say, like, if you're thinking about a BCS, which I think is a really, really valuable thing, and if you're, what?
I know
You
you
have
could
a
finish.
question?
I just was gonna ask about like the plowing and like what's the traditional benefit of that? Is it just like seed to soil contact?
Of the like
The plow,
single
like
bottom
like
plow.
actually like flipping it.
Yeah, so traditionally it's like the way that you expose that soil so that your seed can have a surface to grow on or grow in. And that's like how I learned to do it. That's like the traditional way that I know is like, and that's kind of like when you think of like your old timey farmer, they're
Yeah,
like,
my
they're out there
grandma.
with a plow,
Yeah.
right? You have like your horse-drawn plow. It goes, like the plow is something that goes way back. And only recently have people started to think like, maybe the plow isn't doing great things to our soil because of that plow pan that we had talked about a little bit, where like you keep plowing to the same depth, you're making that compaction in the same spot with every pass, and because you're in this system where you're kind of having to do that every time you want a new bed or you want a new growing space, that repeated stress on that one like spot right where the plow hits, you're going to get compaction that's hard to penetrate with roots, that's hard to have that soil microbial life like travel through. So there's a lot of movement now kind of away from the traditional plowing. But it does have its benefits, and I think like we were trying to get that trade-off of like, okay, if we just plow our fields once, can we then call them good and use other kind of less invasive methods to like reform them into growing spaces? But even that one pass was like not working for us. But it was a learning experience. I think if you all are thinking about equipment and you're thinking like you definitely don't need a tractor under a certain acreage. Like what we're doing right now does not require a tractor. To do the initial field preparation, you can, if you're in an area where other people have tractors, certainly like ask a neighbor who might have a tractor to do that initial tillage. We have friends in Mississippi who don't have a tractor, but they're growing on like 2.5 to 3 acres. They have a neighbor who came and subsoiled and then disked, and then they have a BCS, and they use their BCS to make those beds that they're actually growing in. And I think that's a great method. I think we went with a tractor because of the future expansion, because of the larger space, and also just because at the time we could afford it. And while usually that is a good thing, it doesn't always make for the smartest decisions. Like with the plow, for instance, wasn't the right tool. But you know, I think like I don't want people to look at this and say like, wow, I need like $100,000 to start a farm. That's not true. You can absolutely start a farm with no equipment. You can start a farm with renting a tiller. If your soil is, like Michael was saying, he tilled with just kind of like a walk behind tiller. You just tilled like pasture, right? Or like grass.
Yeah, it was just it was like, I think it had been a residential space at one point in time, so there was like some building rubble in the ground, but it was mostly sandy, river sand, grass, and a big field.
Yeah.
Rome,
Yeah.
what have you
And it
done
can be
for
done.
ground at your property? You have a BCS?
No, I don't have a BCS. I have a Kubota. It's a walk behind. It's a walk behind tiller. I forget, like a 5 horsepower or whatever. But my plot is so rocky. It's like it's a bunch of field dirt that they use, I guess, to fill in this land to make it higher. So they use rocks. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole car underneath, and like, you know, buildings and like everything. So when I plowed through that, it was just constantly hitting rocks and, you know, I mean, huge rocks jumping out and shells of all kinds and glass, and nails. So yeah, that's what I used, but that was a fight as well, just to break initial ground.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
can
it's a
ask
fight.
Alessandro, we had attempted to use our Grillo to raise rows. So we disked, and we found it easier just to use our farm all to bring the rows up and, with hippers, and we loaned that to Allison and Grant, and they found it easier because it's quicker. And it's a light tractor, and you can get in.
Yeah, so the little cub.
Well, it's a farm all. It's a, you know, it's not a cub, but it's a
Not a
farm all. It's a 140. And they have a tractor. It's also with 4-foot centers. So, and they borrowed our hippers. And actually, I loaned that to Baton Roots. They have our hippers too, because it's easier. And they want to be on 4-foot centers with the 30-inch bed top. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like every grower is like just kind of piecing together what's in the area, what do you have access to, at least that initial groundbreaking.
Yeah, because he had tried it. He was the one in the field with the 150-foot long rows and tried to follow what the instructions were that we got with bringing them up with the walk-behind tractor.
Using the grill up, yeah.
And it was just to keep it straight. And
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why we only do 50-foot rows, 50-foot beds here, is because, yeah, it's hard enough to keep that straight. those beds using the BCS walk behind.
And I guess my question, I'm sorry, but,
No, that's fine.
and the reason why I asked about the sedan going to seed is because I had a lot of grass. I got really tall pre-made beds that I made with just wood chips. And so grass eventually grew up, and I just covered everything underneath that tarp. So I'm wondering to myself, did I create just a future seed bed of weeds by just covering, by tarping?
Like the
Really, I had like tall grass, like almost as tall as that, but and I know it's going to seed. You can see the seed heads.
Yeah.
The seed heads are everywhere. So, I still tarped it all,
yeah.
and
Cut it
everything is.
first.
What's that?
Did you mow
I
it,
didn't mow
tarp
it.
it, or you just
I left it just like
just
tall, and I wanted just thinking in general it'll just cause a lot of organic matter under the tarps eventually. So the
Yeah.
longer I let it sit, maybe. But I could see in the future having weed pressure come back just because I did it that way. I was just wondering if you guys had this.
You might have some weed pressure. And we've had some, but it hasn't been that crazy. I don't know, I feel like we also, once we uncover, we add a lot of compost on top. We have composted horse manure that we add also to help with the just like texture of the soil. Our soil is pretty fertile, but getting that fertility to be available, because it's so dense, like we're just trying to kind of like mix it and loosen it up. So that also acts as like a mulch sometimes, helping to suppress those weed seeds. But we definitely have weeds. I don't think we have a lot of Sudan grass that we have. I think it's more of like this kind of pasture grass still. Do y'all have any other questions? Definitely feel free to ask questions as we go. So that's pretty much all we use our tractor for at this point. We also do a lot of like hauling stuff with our bucket. We have forks that we use to haul stuff. There's like a lot of trash back in that tree area that we've used to haul out. So it's not just a soil working piece of equipment, which is also a large reason why we bought it, just to have a way to get from this side of the property to the other side of the property with material. But as I said, like, we absolutely could get by without a tractor. It would be a challenge. But
you have to be calling your neighbors all the time.
yeah, it's like if calling and renting a tractor from a neighbor or paying them to do it definitely works, but then you're on someone else's schedule. And sometimes we only have so many dry days where we want to get in there. That's part of the reason why we ended up just buying the disc, because we kept calling and it was like, okay, well, they can't bring it to the end of the week, but it's going to rain. We're not going to be able to do it then. So also like the delivery was just as much as renting it. So just those kinds of decisions will kind of make themselves clear if you are considering an equipment purchase. The zero turn, this you can definitely live without, but it's really fun. And I was looking back at it, and Christian was looking it up earlier and was like, is that a $16,000 mower? And I was like, yes, it is. And now I can't remember why we bought the $16,000 mower, but again, Kubota financing can really sell you something that it's like, oh, okay, it's only $300 a month.
It's free.
First it's free, then it's like in 6 weeks you get a bill and you're like, what's this for again? So, say Kubota financing, great. Also, watch yourself. But this does come in huge handy for like we'll mow a large pasture we'll mow around it. We have a little orchard back there. We're going to keep planting fruit trees and other food trees. So we're going to keep having spaces that are very hard to get into with the tractor and also require a little more of a finishing mow. Also,
And it's so much faster.
it's so much faster. It goes 11 miles an hour. This goes like 4 miles an hour. Also, we did get, I think the reason why it's so expensive is because we got a 60-inch deck so that we could straddle our growing beds and mow crop residue before tarping. Which we do when it's dry enough to get in there with the zero turn. What we had been doing previously was what I had done in the past at other farms was use the flail mower on the BCS, which is on the 3rd page here, which is a really great tool, but it's very heavy. It's very hard to use on a raised bed because you're kind of fighting with that BCS on an angle. You're trying to mow like the shoulder of a bed that's raised like 6 inches. I just am starting to feel in my body that like there are certain things that I don't want to continue doing as I think about farming for the rest of my life. And I think that's a really valuable thing to consider. Like, how much physical work is it going to be? Like, can you get a piece of equipment? Is it worth the price of a more expensive piece of equipment to alleviate some of that like personal hand labor? I think when we first start, we have a lot of energy. We're like, we can do this all by hand, but there's no reason to kind of like wear yourself out if you don't have to. I'm not trying to be a hero with the BCS and like just fight with that constantly. I was finding any reason not to use the BCS when I was like really tired, or if it was a particularly like intense looking bed that I was gonna have to get under a mow. It was just like, I'm trying to avoid it. That's a good sign that maybe we need to rethink this system. So this has been actually really great for kind of cleaning up our fields when we're done, when we've harvested everything, but the weeds have gone big, or like, you know, we have like sweet potato greens we mow. Yeah.
So the mower actually goes on top of the bed, like it just straddle it?
Yeah, so those sweet potatoes that we just harvested, I just went in there with that
Cut it?
to mow them and chop them up.
So your bed's 30 or 60 inches?
Our beds are 60 inches on center. They're more like a 32 to 36 top. And those we make with the BCS. But they're 60 inches on center in case we ever do want to get in there with the tractor or the zero turn. Those can both straddle a bed. And so if I had a no-till drill, I would just drive over our permanent beds and seed that cover crop right into all of those beds. And that's what I'm hoping to do in this field. Or if we had another implement that I'm dreaming about is a roller crimper, where you can just have your tall stand of cover crop that's, you know, your beautiful Sudan grass or something else that's just like creating a lot of organic matter.
Not what I have.
And you can just roll over it with a roller crimper, and it kills it because it crimps the plant and actually like stops the flow of water and nutrients from the roots to the top of the plant. And so that action actually kills the plant over time, and it creates this mulch layer that you can then transplant directly into.
And how do you guys seed now? How do you guys seed
the
that?
cover crop?
Yes.
We have some shoulder bag seeders.
Oh, it's just a broadcast.
Just a broadcast, yep. And we'll, if it's not wet, then we'll do a light disc after we've broadcast seeded to try and incorporate those seeds a little bit. And that's what we'll do probably in the next few weeks on that next pasture, to try and get a winter cover crop in there for, I don't know when we'll want to plant into there, but you know, maybe next year, next fall. So.
And that's the Sudan grass as well?
We won't do Sudan grass in the winter. We'll do probably more of a like oats and winter peas and maybe like some fava beans.
What about crop seeding?
I see.
Or are y'all just transplanting? Or
Like seeding into the beds.
yeah,
We use our Jang
the Jang in here.
and then transplanting. Yeah.
And the Jang works in the clay.
Yes. So the Jang is great for the foot. Also something I wasn't sure about. We're just gonna try it, see what happens.
Yeah.
But the Jang has been really good. Like it's not perfect because it's kind of bumpy still, and we're getting a lot of like clumps and some residue. But when we make beds, if I know I want to direct seed into them, I'll maybe take extra care to take out some residue and clumping and try and make it a smoother bed for the Jang. But yeah, if you're dealing with like really rough soil, I think the Jang cedar in terms of like a push cedar, I don't have it with me here unfortunately, but that can handle really rough conditions and has been totally adequate here. So a lot of these tools have really surprised us because, after Ellen was like, I wanted to think about not growing vegetables. We had, kind of love hopes for these things, and we're happy to see that they actually work pretty well. And as we're continuing to grow in the soil is getting a lot nicer to work. Like, beds that we've been growing into will come in and broad fork them, and they're a lot easier on broad forking, or we'll come and transplant into them. They're a lot easier to dig into. So it's like just that first year is always going to be really rough with the sod, and like the weed pressure is going to be higher, and like your beds are going to look really rough in the beginning. But every time you grow in that bed, every time you amend it or tend to it, it gets a little nicer. And that's part of the reason why we want to go towards permanent raised beds, is so that, like, in Massachusetts, we used to, at the end of the year, we used to come in and just disc the whole field, try to incorporate everything that we were growing. And then we'd come back in the spring and we'd have to make all those beds again. And it was like, well, A, it's too wet in the spring, so we have to wait until it dried out enough to come in with the tractor and make those beds. And I was like, well, we just had beds here. Like, why did we erase those beds? Why not just try and keep them permanent? So that's what we're trying to do here. It's just, focus all of that fertility and like composting and like amendment energy into the space that we're going to be growing. Like, why fertilize the pathway? So the way that we then, once we get to the point where we're tarping, we'll come through and subsoil again with the BCS using this, because it makes it a lot easier to make those raised beds. Like Alessandro had that experience with the Grillo, trying to make 150-foot raised beds with the plow. And why don't we actually walk over to the BCS so we can see, because we're kind of mid-process right now of making